My name is Sophia, for those of you that don't know me. And today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Akanksha Srivastava. And she'll be talking about visualization to realization and XR's role in craniofacial reconstruction, which is incredible to even think about how it would be used in that manner. So I really am looking forward to this presentation. So, just a quick reminder, we are going to be recording and posting on YouTube. So please make sure to subscribe to our channel
Oh, did Sophia's
Lost your
audio cut
audio
out?
just then. Yes.
Yeah.
Just when she said mute it, interestingly.
is it still
There
muted?
we go. There we
No.
go.
Okay.
Back.
Okay. All right. Coming back. All right. And yeah, so just make sure to be respectful because all of this is going to be recorded and posted on YouTube. Okay. Thank you again to all of our sponsors and partners who have made this possible for the many years we've been doing this. And we want to welcome our new members of our community that are listed here. And I'm sure there are more potentially in this room. If you would like to introduce yourself, please raise your hand and we'll give you a chance to speak and you can unmute yourself for a moment. Or you don't have to raise your hand. You can just unmute yourself if you don't have hands to raise. Okay, moving on. And if you haven't yet subscribed to our newsletter, weekly newsletter, you can go on xrwoman.com and the upper right hand corner. You can join our community there, and that will get you access to our Slack channel and our newsletter, so you can stay updated on what's going on weekly and different initiatives that we have going on. And as we discussed in the beginning of this presentation, we are going to be discussing some really sensitive subjects and but really fascinating subjects as well. So just be aware of this. And for those of you that are on your phone, you can scan this QR code, but we'll also post the link the in the chat function in Frame and also in Slack. We are just doing our annual feedback survey to see what you liked and what we about the content for this year and what you would like to see moving forward in 2025. And also, we are hosting. It'll have a question in there. We're hosting a live event in February, and we're going to get your feedback in that survey to see which of you would like to attend this live event, so we can make sure that we're accounting for the numbers we should be. So in this event, it's basically celebrating 200 uh, 200 events that we have hosted and produced over these past many years, about 4 years now. And we're going to have hands-on XR workshops. We're going to talk about our business skills. We're going to have wellness there, mentorship, networking, and of course, all the fun stuff that goes along with that as well. It'll be hosted live at Ringling College of Art and Design, who is also our as hosting our first student chapter as well. So we're honored to be there, and also IVRA, the International Virtual Reality Healthcare Association, will be hosting a hackathon with students there as well. So we'll be uh, partnering with them on some of their initiatives that they'll have going on there and meeting with the students as well. So it'll be a great opportunity for us to meet in person, get to know one another even better than we can through avatars, and really have an opportunity to learn some new skills as well. We are always looking for sponsors, and especially for this live event because it does take resources. So if you all have anything that you would like to contribute to this event, whether you're going to be there or not, or have ideas of people or companies that may be interested in participating, please reach out to Karen, Julie, or I, or any of the other people on the leadership team, and we'd be happy to discuss. So you guys are already in frame, but this is our XR Woman official museum where we host, kind of all the archives of everything that we've done. We have a research corner and we have a gallery as well. So please do explore that. You can, if you're on your phone, you can scan your QR code to get to that as well. And then there's a business showcase that is hosted in Engage, and you can jump in at any time and view some of the companies that are there and the services that they provide. And our YouTube is growing faster than ever. We have been steadily recording almost every presentation and hosting it on YouTube for people that can't attend our events or just would like to review some of the information. So if you could do us a favor and go on our YouTube and subscribe, it would really help us out. And that way you'll also be notified every time we have a new video that's posted there also. So please go to our XR Woman YouTube channel and hit subscribe for us. We have a campaign going on called Pin Your Power. And it's just an opportunity for us to, again, show unity and show, just showcase the strength in our community. And so we have a lot of people, Julie, Karen, Jenna, and others, Trisha, they've already posted their pictures for this campaign of them wearing their pin. So you can go on any of their social media and LinkedIn profiles to see how they've posted about it. Go to XR Woman LinkedIn profile to see how we're posting about it. And it's just encouraging people to check out our community and join our community. And there is a limited edition pin that you can purchase that will greatly help our community out in our operations. But you'll also get a physical pin that will ship to you. It's $35, and if you go on our website, um, right now it's only under the subscribe option, so you can definitely get to it from the subscribe option. But Karen is also going to post the link in both Slack and in this chat in frame as well, and we will get a more obvious button on our website here shortly today as well. So you can join our community that way, support us, show your support on LinkedIn and other social media platforms also. And is Julie in the room today? We have
I
we've
am.
started. Did she say she is?
I'm here.
She's
Yeah.
here.
Okay, Julie, would you like to say a few words about this slide?
Sure, sure. Yeah. Last week, so I'm trying to spin up a health a wellness word every week for us. And last week was all about balance. And trust me, I'm working on it myself with work-life balance. But one of the things that's, in um, thinking more about work-life balance is about grounding. So today's word is grounding. And if you need to ground yourself, whether it be walk outside in the grass and stick your toes between the grass and feel the nature, observe your surroundings, moving your body, meditating, and really indulging in self-care, because it's all about the mind, body, and soul. So raising up your vibration. I thought that was a really cool little image in the bottom left corner there. But yeah, that's your word for today, is grounding yourself so you can have that mind, body, and soul to go on with your day and be the best person you can be. So that's it for today. Happy grounding to you. Back over to you, Sophia.
I love that, Julie. Yeah. Okay. And if Robin's here, she's more than welcome to speak about this as well. But she has partnered up, well, 3 Pound Games has partnered up with Children's Cancer Research Fund and their Big Dreams virtual tour to raise money for this great initiative. They Big Dreams virtual tour basically, James Arrigo helps brings children with cancer together to basically help them experience, life outside the hospital bedroom, and gets them in headsets and gets them creating in headsets. Kind of, I describe it as a make a wish that they're creating themselves, which is really, really cool. And so Robin and 3 Pound Games and team have partnered with them to create this game called Grocket Cancer Blaster, where you're blasting cancer cells. And I believe it was in some way it was helped created by the children. Was it not? Is Robin here?
Mhm, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the kids got together and envisioned what it would be like to have a grok game that was to fight cancer, and they used AI to generate some cool 2D images. There's a lot of the stuff in some of our social media about the materials that were provided to us, and then how we convolve those into actual 3D elements and really even the environment, like they provided all of these pieces of 2D art that we turned into proper 3D environment art. And I got voiceover from some kids, super talented stuff, really stoked about that. Love that they're leaning into their creativity and taking the focus on building things and not about being stuck in a hospital. So it's all about. And we're going to be also at the upcoming Ready Player Golf event. This is a Sophia, right back at you for that as something coming up in December, I think. I think we're looking at. Is that right?
End of November, but yeah.
Oh, end of November. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. There should be more news there. Because that is actually where this was born out of last year. I was invited to come to the Ready Player Golf and just fell in love with this story and all the great work that James is doing there. And we wanted to get involved, so we stepped up and found a way that we could shed some more light onto this organization and the great work that they're doing.
I love that. I love that. I had no idea that's how you got introduced to them. That's great. And yeah, we'll share more information about Ready Player Golf coming up soon. We'll post that next week. But yeah, QR codes all over the place if you wanna if
Yeah, and
you want.
that's actually available now. We should probably change the slide since it is September that it has been released, and we will
Okay.
be continuing to hammer this as all year round. We're not just going to leave it up in September, but we did want to launch it in September just to raise awareness that September is Childhood Cancer Month. So if you have hospitals and medical centers, if there's anybody out there like that who already has headsets for kids, I'm happy to provide them some keys so that they can, have their kids play the game as well. So feel free to contact me.
That's awesome. Thank you for doing all of that, Robin. Okay, so coming up in the next several weeks, we have Evie Simmons, who will be talking about building an open source framework for social VR applications. Then we'll have our friend Caitlin Kraus come up and talk about digital well-being, and she just announced the release of her new book called Digital Well-being, and so we're really happy for her, and congratulations to Caitlin on that. And that will start in Frame and end in Engage, just FYI. And then we have Anatola Araba, who will doing an interactive workshop, which I like. I like those a lot. Talking about reimagining the future through art and technology. And then Dr. Jackie Morey will be joining us, and she will be talking about formidable female creators, and she is definitely one to speak on the subject. As you can see, she has lots of awards with Accenture and the XR Hall of Fame, and she was also our 2022 XR Woman Trailblazer. So we're happy to have her back on the stage. And then I'll pass it over to Caroline to introduce Dr. Akanksha Srivastava.
Thank you, Sophia.
Yes.
Whoop. Good morning, everybody. Whoop. I'm really excited about Akanksha, Dr. Srivastav, her talk today. I met Akanksha a year ago during a VRA or Chicago event, and I came away so struck by not only the work that she has been doing in AR and VR with craniofacial and so many complex procedures, but on the way that she has been able to show how effective and how actionable these initiatives are right now. Because I think a lot of times in medicine, we're talking about innovations, but really seeing the results of that is, to me, extremely exciting. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Srivastav. So just a little bit about her. Dr. Akanksha Srivastava is a diplomate of the American College of Prosthodontics, a fellow of the American Association of Malleofacial Prosthetics, and a dual board certified prosthodontist by the American Board of Prosthodontics and the Royal College of Dentists of Canada. Dr. Srivastava works as a malleofacial prosthodontist at the University of Illinois Health Craniofacial Center to provide prosthetic rehabilitation to children and adults with congenital and acquired orofacial conditions. Specializes in craniofacial implants, utilizing state-of-the-art digital technologies, including mixed reality, to enhance her patients' oral rehabilitation outcomes. Well, that's an incredible mouthful, but at the heart of it, I'm just so thrilled that you're here, Akanksha, and welcome. And I will let her share her webcam. So, Sophia, if you want to stop sharing, and then I will let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I am very excited about this, and I have never done a talk in frame. I'm new to this, so thank you so much for inviting me. Last year, when I was at the VR AR Chicago event, it was just so fascinating for me to interact with everybody who's working in the field. So I am so grateful for you giving me this opportunity to be able to talk about how we're using this. Just give me one moment while I share. It doesn't want to pick up my screen. Here we go.
Great.
Let's hope it plays. Yes, it is. Okay, wonderful. Sorry. I think I can either be in frame or be in PowerPoint. It's not. So I'll face all of you. Hello once again. Caroline, could you confirm that you're seeing the video working?
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
paused. Okay, wonderful. And thank you again. So I just want to take a moment and describe what is it that I do, because maxillofacial prosthodontist isn't really a term that you hear very frequently. My base training started in dentistry, and because we're working within the oral and head and neck zone, it just is this sort of what I do as a healthcare provider just is best suited with that sort of training. So it starts with dentistry. Then I did a residency in prosthodontics, and that's where we become more familiar with just creating prosthetics of different kinds. So if you think about somebody getting veneers all the way to somebody getting a dental implant, that's all within a prosthodontist specialty. But beyond that, I did a fellowship, so that is my subspecialty, and that's called maxillofacial prosthodontics. And this is where I move away from the dental world into the medical world. So what I do is essentially a much more complex now. I see patients who've had cancer of their head and neck or had very severe trauma. I live in Chicago, so unfortunately I see a lot of patients with gunshot wounds. And then just younger adults and kids all the way through their adulthood who are born with any sort of congenital differences of their facial structure. What you're seeing right behind me on this slide is me planning some implants for a patient in this VR environment. And this is a patient who's missing her nose because of cancer. So I'm going to touch a little bit more about this. But once again, that is exactly what I do. We are at the University of Illinois Cleft and Craniofacial Center. My slide doesn't want to advance. Apologize for that. There we go. All right. So the Craniofacial Center in Chicago, this is the second oldest center in the country. We are celebrating our 75th anniversary this year, and it has just been doing exactly this, is serving a a very, very complex, pool of patients. And also, the reason I said I wanted all of you to would just take a moment to understand what maxillofacial prosthodontics is, because we're a very, very rare specialty within dentistry. This is the only subspecialty that exists actually. And across the country, there's less than 50 of us who do this full time. There's a lot of people who graduate with the specialization but don't actually end up applying it to their patients. So it is very rare, and a lot of patients, very deserving patients, struggle to be able to access this care. So I am very grateful to be, part of an excellent team that is entirely devoted to this. Now, Caroline and I had a little chat before this lecture. I did remove all patient images and surgical images. I understand that not everybody here comes from a surgical background or even a healthcare background. So and that can be very sensitive and disturbing to a lot of people. So if there's anybody from healthcare within the audience who wants to have a conversation, I'm more than happy to get on an individual call and show you more of the implementation and surgical photos and all of that. But I just wanted to be mindful and not have people feel worse about this lecture. So most of what you will see is just me planning things in VR. And if you need to, interrupt me anytime, I'm absolutely okay with that. What I'm hoping to talk about is just in general, not just my field, but what are some of the emerging applications in healthcare, and then focus a little bit more on VR that I am using in craniofacial planning, not just implant planning, but a little bit more reconstruction. AR is an aspect that AR is something that I want to say, more in the R&D phase, and I'll tell you why that is. But AR has so much opportunity for us when we're actually doing surgery. So I'll just give you some examples of how we're trying things on, and where are we actually limited at the moment. So now I know all of you have been in this field for much longer and probably are experts in this much more than I am. I'm an end user of these technologies. I'm just very privileged to work with some of the developers who take my feedback and are able to incorporate it. I don't have any financial relationships with any company, but what I want to talk about is how I have come to, and like people around me, when we're talking about these technologies, how I have come to understand what each of these terms mean, and what we're using them for. So, and again, you can tell me at the end of this talk if I should be thinking about this any differently, because I know there aren't very hard and fast definitions around each of these terms. But extended reality is something that I use commonly just as an umbrella term to define all of these other AR, MR, and VR technologies, which is from one end of the spectrum, which is, you just have some simple digital superimposition to a fully immersed digital environment. So a good example of how I view AR is this technology. This is essentially a laser scan of veins on somebody's arms that is then being superimposed. So it's a simple digital superimposition on the patient's skin. So a phlebotomist who is trying to draw blood from somebody's veins can use this technology called AccuVein, and just be able to see where the veins are. So the reason I feel this is something, best titled AR is because, once again, it's very simply a digital superimposition on physical elements. You cannot change any aspect of the digital superimposition itself. I can certainly change the physical elements, such as what they're doing is just pressing down in the vein and it changes the digital superimposition. So I can modify the physical elements, but not exactly the digital superimposition itself, is my thought of what AR truly means here. Mixed reality being something that you have digital superimpositions, but you can just interact with it a lot more. And this is what is very fascinating within healthcare, is just from a patient education or patient experience standpoint, but also from a provider standpoint. And then VR, of course, you're in a completely digital environment with no physical elements whatsoever. So I want to just talk a little bit about what has been happening, especially starting the pandemic. We saw a lot more utilization of these technologies. So Cleveland Clinic and Case Western Reserve University, they worked with Microsoft to create Hollow Anatomy. And they are essentially trying to replace their entire anatomy curriculum to be entirely in VR. And this has so many benefits because it's so much more interactive to study anatomy this way. I mean, when I studied, it was all textbooks and it's all diagrams on like diagrams within textbooks that you're trying to visualize, and then you're in an anatomy dissection room truly to be able to see this on a cadaver course really. And that's how we studied anatomy. And then came YouTube videos that made things a lot easier to understand. But being now able to immerse yourself in VR and like an entire classroom of people being able to see what an instructor is trying to teach you rather than, you know, in a cadaver dissection room, it has really changed what studying anatomy means. So this is like absolutely one of the subjects that is so well suited for VR. Um, Another place where we're seeing a lot of uptake is surgical training. So if you think about complex surgery, so this is a very good example. This is orthopedic surgery, and it makes sense because orthopedic surgery is, you know, you know, financially very well-to-do specialty. So they are able to venture into different sort of technologies. But orthopedic surgery also, or any surgery, for instance, that is very complex in a sense that it has a lot of different steps that somebody would need to do, is a great place for VR surgical training because residents, before they're in the operating room, can go through all of this VR training and be able to understand what exactly these steps are. Because, you know, any missing out on any step can be very critical, you know, in terms of a failure of that procedure. So just being able to rehearse this repeatedly, right? You're not anymore stuck with just being able to observe as an assisting person in the operating room or just seeing everything live or studying it in textbooks. The possibilities of rehearsing this an endless number of times also gives an opportunity. People are, you know, learners with different speed, different momentum, right? Somebody can see a surgery once and really remember it, versus there are other residents who require just, you know, being able to watch it multiple times. So again, this is such an excellent opportunity for people to be able to learn at their own pace and just, you know, try it out as many times. I'm just going to go back a little bit in this video for you to see another great thing that is, you know, being developed, which I am very fascinated with, is just being able to incorporate haptic feedback within VR educational environments. So when this person is basically tapping, or when they were using a drill of some sort, the resident who's training in this would be able to feel that they were using a handpiece rather than, you know, just using your controller. So haptic devices, I'm very fascinated what's being developed. I saw a YouTube last week where they're developing a little film that you could just stick on your finger, and that is enough to give you feedback, both in terms of distance to what you're trying to touch, as well as just proprioception. So this is very fascinating to me. Here's, oops, sorry. This is another module, VR training module that comes from NYU, that's New York University, and very applicable to the dental world. So a big part of training for dental students, so this would be year 2 and then year 3 of dental school, is learning how to give injections. And I'm sure if any of you have been to a dentist, you know that that is not a fun part. But you like normal training for like administering dental anesthetics or local anesthesia is really about experimenting on each other. That's what happens in dental school. You will, you know, have a friend of yours and you will inject them, and that's a painful way to learn, really. Plus, also a very limited way to learn. So this is a very excellent VR module that has been developed, where you can not only see everything anatomically, understand that if you angled your needle one way or the other, would you do a better job versus a worse job, but you can also see that it gives you feedback. Right here in red, you're seeing that the VR module is saying you're delivering the anesthesia way too fast, so slow down. And that is one thing that is so important for students to learn, because the pain that somebody feels when they're getting a shot is really dependent on how fast somebody is injecting that medicine or that anesthetic, really. So this sort of feedback, and even if there was an instructor standing right next to you and telling you, hey, slow down, it is, you know, it still takes a long time to develop that muscle memory of how slow you have to go so that, you know, your patient is not feeling pain. So just again, being able to train in VR and having the opportunity of train a million times before you actually implement this on a patient is just such a great opportunity that we have not had till now, but this is amazing. Another thing is for pharmaceutical employees. Now, pharmaceutical employees obviously go through very similar, very complex training, so many critical steps involved in what they're doing. But then we get onto something that is more rare, like, cell therapy or gene therapy. So like, especially for cancer patients, you are using their own normal cells, which is, so I'm sure you've heard of people going through bone marrow transplant and things like that. You're using a very small portion of their bone marrow, or very small or limited quantities of something that is available, and trying to treat this patient. So the room for error there is just not present. I would say there is zero room for error. So for pharmaceutical employees or any such trainees who are working in very complex environments, for them to be able to repeatedly train in what they need to do in terms of steps involved in such therapies is, I think, very, very fascinating, because you just don't have that room for error, really, in so many things. Another thing that I have found very interesting is just molecular designing or molecular modeling. And this used to be, and I've seen this like done on computer screens, where no matter how much you enlarge a molecule of a drug or a protein structure, it is so complex to read, right? Versus you being able to just pull it out of the screen and see it in virtual reality is absolutely mind blowing. And you can see there's an avatar of a person here. So it just is a really great way of opening real-time global collaboration, right? This person could be across the world, and I'm not sure where all of you are. You could be across the world right now. So again, the doors that VR are opening within healthcare collaboration is fantastic. Moving on to a little bit more on the patient end of things, not just provider end of things. Luminopia is the first FDA-approved VR glasses-based therapy for a condition called amblyopia. So I'm going to simplify that a little bit. Amblyopia is a condition, or in lay terms, it's known as a lazy eye, right? So I'm sure you've either heard of this term or know somebody, but you essentially have one eye, sometimes both eyes, but more commonly just one eye that's a lazy eye, and it's really weak. So its muscular structure is really, really weak. And traditional therapy, basically, for such patients has been to cover up the strong eye and make the weak eye work a lot more so it gets stronger. And that's a bit of a torture. Like that's an agonizing way to treat your eye that is not as strong. So with VR, the way it works in terms of just the stereoscopic eye movement that is involved, you can, without having to torture your strong eye, really just use VR-based therapy to be able to strengthen the weak eye. So this is very fascinating. Uh, some other reasons, or pain. Pain is a very common area, chronic pain specifically, that VR is seeing a lot of research. So this is one such program where you're just in an immersed environment, and it's an 8-week program for patients with chronic low back pain. I know a lot of research that is being done. Sorry, research that is being done and just seeing how patients perceive pain when they are in an immersed VR environment versus not, let's say, as they're going through a procedure, as they're going through an injection at any site, people who are really nervous about injections. So there's a lot of research being done here, and there is a lot of scope for development here, because there have been great, great results with VR based pain related programs. And in the same way, it applies a lot to mental health, really, and post-op rehabilitation services. So this would be, for instance, somebody went through surgery, they need a physical therapist to be training them. And yes, you can go see your physical therapist once a week or twice a week, but you could also have a VR immersive program where that just guides you to how you have to be doing procedures, sorry, have to be doing certain exercises in your post-op rehabilitation phase, but also, again, pain control after going through a surgery. This is another one that is very fascinating to me. This is now an iPhone-based augmented reality app that can actually see when somebody is going from very mild cognitive impairment to more severe cognitive impairment with Alzheimer's or with dementia. And this is with very high specificity and sensitivity. I actually forgot to tag what the name of this app is. I will send that in the link, or I would send that to Caroline. I apologize for that. But this is where I use it, and this was all, just general applications that are basically programs that are developed that are more generalized and universal. Any student, anybody who's learning can essentially use this. I am using this for very specific things. So this is I am using it for surgical planning. So it's not just an anatomical model. I am using real patient data, like individual patient data, to be able to plan their surgeries within VR. And the greatest thing, I think, for me has been, and I'll show you some, you're going to see some slides very soon, is the difference that you will see in what our current abilities are. So when we're talking about looking at somebody's CT scans or looking at somebody's MRI scans, and versus looking at that same data in VR, how much more intuitive and simple and immersive it is, that makes a huge difference. But another great thing is, as you can see, I wrote here intraoperative rehearsal. Right now, when we're planning things, and we've been digital, like we've been using digital technologies for quite some time, right? Like I want to say early 2000s, we went hard into using digital technologies for surgical planning. But despite that, when we do plan in our existing softwares that we have any kind of surgery, we're still going from there. We would have planned a surgery, let's say at least a month and a half in advance for a complex reconstruction surgery, at least a month and a half in advance to the actual surgery, because it takes time to manufacture certain things. And then on the day of surgery, we might look at the CT scan again just before we're scrubbing in, or we're going to have a lot of printouts that are like literally put up on a wall somewhere in the operating room, and just basically sort of rehearse things. With VR, I can like just pull up the same planning that I did very easily. And that's what I'm doing right here, is just before I scrub in for the surgery, I just put on my VR headset and I'm revising everything. I'm just rehearsing the entire surgery just before doing that surgery. And that has so much benefit to sort of, you're prepared, you're mentally prepared for everything that you're about to do in the operating room. All right, so let's jump into how we are using VR in craniofacial surgery and why it's important. So this is, I think, the biggest thing is the depth perception that VR brings, right? And that's because of the stereoscopic display properties. So on the left side, what you're seeing is a CT scan viewer. And you can see what I have to do is like look at everything in multiple different slices, right? I have to scroll up and down, or I have to scroll right to left or front to back. So this is all two-dimensional imaging. And in the same video, if you look at the right bottom corner, which is the orangish looking thing, that is a three-dimensional volumetric rendering of all this two-dimensional data. And even though it is a three-dimensional rendering, it is still on a two-dimensional screen. So even though I can like sort of perceive that this is more like a skull, I have no depth perception truly. Everything is still looks like a 2D, right? Versus in the right video, which is in VR, obviously you're still seeing it on a two-dimensional screen. But when I'm wearing headsets, I am truly immersed in that environment. My perception of the depth is a night and day difference versus looking at a screen. So the reason this has so many more advantages is we're all trained to do like to plan surgeries using what you're seeing on the left side, right? And this is not intuitive. We all just have to go through this training just to be able to read data this way, because that's all that has existed so far. So I mean, yes, and we've all gotten really good at it. But once again, being able to see all of this in VR is such a night and day difference. So a good example I want to give you is I have had people who have no understanding of surgical planning or anything like that. They can put on a VR headset, look at a skull, and be able to understand and appreciate things so much easier. So for students who are just getting into the fields, for them, just being able to train with VR is going to be so much more intuitive and easier to grasp than what we have had to do with two-dimensional imaging softwares. All right. So once again, I know I've used these words enough, is just enhanced and immersive visualization, but also what you're seeing me do, I'm just like walking into a patient's anatomy, right? And I can like just look at things at the depth of it. I can look at it from any possible angle. And that is not true in our existing softwares. You saw that in the previous video that I can only scroll in 3 different directions, right? We call it coronal, axial, and sagittal. It's just different planes. So once again, it is not as intuitive. The other very fascinating thing that you're going to see in this video is that right now, if I'm looking at CT scan data, it's a different software. If I'm looking at MRI data, it's a different software. If I need to look at somebody's blood vessels, like their arteries and their veins, that they went through a different kind of CT scan for, it's a different software. I cannot look at all of this together, right? And that is one thing that VR, especially the VR programs that I'm using right now, they have changed this so much. So what you're looking at right now is the patient's skin. So this is a patient's skin who had a CT scan. You can remove the skin. You can look at the muscles. Now you're looking at the bone, and you can look at the organs inside. So this is a patient, I'm sure most of you can appreciate if you look left versus right. This is a patient who was in a very terrible traffic, like car accident, and they have broken a lot of their ribs, right? And you can so easily appreciate this. Versus in a 2-dimensional imaging software, I would have had to go slice through slice through slice to be able to read all of these. And these slices are either 1 millimeter apart or 2 millimeters apart. And that's just CT scan. But just look at that. That's their shoulder bone, their scapula, and just look at how much it is basically fractured. And you can appreciate it. So for me as a surgeon, this becomes so much easier. Now I'm looking at the lungs, and you can see the right side, the lungs are normal. And on the left side, lungs are not all normal. The blue-sided lungs are what's just filled with air. The purple is what's normal. And red is what is now filled with blood because of this accident. And just, again, makes visualization so much easier of multiple different things that you want to be able to appreciate, right? Because this just becomes harder with 2 dimension. And look at this. I have now an internal view, like I'm inside this patient's rib cage, visualizing these fractures. This is not a possibility in a 3-dimensional rendering of 2D data, because you can only look at the surface of the video that you saw that was a little bit in orange. You can only, any kind of volumetric rendering of 2D data, you're only looking at the surface. You cannot just walk into it. And the final thing I want to say with the help of this video is when we're looking at viewers, like when we're looking at imaging, so what you were seeing, most softwares that exist or most abilities that exist for us right now is just to be able to view things, right? You cannot manipulate anything in those softwares. I cannot like plan, I cannot treat. Versus what you're seeing here within this VR environment, this surgeon is highlighting like how they need to fix these bones. This isn't possible in most of our other softwares that exist today. We would have to take that data from a viewer to, let me say, if you're familiar with Freeform or Mesh Mixer or just some sort of, not necessarily an open source, but something comparable to it, which is meant to do free-form editing of like similar STL data. But in this VR environment, I'm not only viewing things, I'm not only diagnosing things, I can just plan the entire procedure. So it just makes it very logical. And then so I want to show you one more thing, and that is just measuring things in 3D space. And within VR, then this is very, very interesting. I don't have an answer to this, but you can measure from one surface to another, like 3-dimensional surfaces, and it's very accurate. I cannot do the same thing with volumetric rendering of 2D data. There's always discrepancies there. Another great thing is, and I know this VR is built with patients' data from CT scans, and I can incorporate any of that. So I can look at the MRI and the CT scan data, all of it within the VR environment, really. So I don't have to be looking at 3 different sets of images to be able to see what I need to see. I can look all of that with the 3D rendering within virtual reality. So once again, making it very, very intuitive for me. So our group, this is a little bit before I even got to this place. There are people who've been developing our VR environment for quite some time. But this is a group that actually looked into the accuracy of measurements that we do within VR, and they found it to be extremely accurate and reproducible, both in terms of linear measurements or any kind of angular measurements. And a big difference has, once again, as I was saying, like we all have just become trained to look at a computer screen and be able to read all this two-dimensional data, and just use a mouse. Like the mouse has become what we visualize all of this with. But it is so far from reality, because in reality, I am looking at a patient who is, you know, a three-dimensional human being, and I am working with my hands. I am working, you know, with a scalpel in my hand, or other tools, other instruments in my hand, not with a mouse. And once again, like with having more hand controls, with either just a controller or different sort of haptic devices that are being developed, is just very fascinating to make things more intuitive. So this I find very fascinating is, these are haptic VR gloves. So the one on the left is something that will give you pressure perception. So if I was using a drill of some sort, I would feel the vibrations in my hand. Versus one on the right is very similar to what you would see in movies, with green screen, where they're doing motion tracking or distance tracking, really. And you can, that's what these gloves really are for. To just show you another video. So this is a person, they're holding again a haptic device in their left hand, and with that white device they can feel all the pressure, and they're wearing a glove on their right hand, and they can, as they're feeling what is supposed to be skin and bone, let me just go back on this video, as they're feeling skin and bone, they will get a pressure perception of what should feel like skin, which would be soft, and what should feel like bone, which would be much harder. So that is the level that these technologies have already been developed. And it's very, very fascinating to me. I have not had the chance to use these yet, but I'm absolutely an enthusiast when it comes to understanding what is, you know, out there. Then I want to talk about why all of this matters. The reason all of this matters is because now you're putting the control of whatever surgical planning back in the hands of the surgeons. So when I mentioned to you that, you know, early 2000s, we started using digital technologies quite extensively for surgical planning. What started happening though is, you know, in most complex surgeries, you've got multiple surgeons who are involved. Uh, with digital planning, or what's the correct term for it is virtual surgical planning, or VSP is what we call it. There is a biomedical engineer at the end of the software, and they're the ones who are controlling everything. They run everything. We are on a Zoom call, and we give them feedback as to, okay, I need you to move this way, and need you to move that or change that. Um, but what that does is again, it's an engineer who's doing the planning. We probably read all that data from a diagnostic standpoint, but the planning sort of went to the engineer. And even though we're there and we approve it and we're there every step of the way, there is a huge difference that I can tell you myself between me doing a VSP planning versus planning it myself in VR. Is not only did I read all the data from a diagnostic standpoint, now that I am planning all of this in VR myself, I am just revising. I'm becoming so much more familiar with the patient's anatomy and the surgery that I'm about to perform. And then once again, before I start surgery and before I scrub in, I will put on this VR headset and rehearse everything I had planned. So I basically have 3 time points where I just, you know, did the same thing over and over again to be more familiar. So just improving not only my diagnostic ability, but just familiarity with what I'm about to do. So in that sense, I feel there's VR has a lot of advantages. Um, and then once again, like I said, surgical planning. So I'll show you one case of mine, and I removed all the surgical photos once again. So hopefully this is nothing that should be disturbing. This is a patient who's missing half their jaw, okay, and missing left side of their jaw because of cancer. One thing that VR has helped me a lot with is just the speed at which I can plan things, okay, and how intuitively I can plan this. So what I am doing for this patient is I am planning a bunch of implants. What you're seeing in pink is going to be what their final prosthetics look like. They right now did not have very many, you know, teeth left. So I'm planning all of these implants, and once again, I can just look at the anatomy from any direction, and that is so fascinating. I can make it a little bit more transparent and look at where this person's sinus is, or where their nose is, or where there's bone available. And this is just not so intuitive on a CT screen where I have to look at each one of these things in 3 different cross sections, basically, right? So you can see what I just did was I took a CT overlay. This is a CT scan overlay, but instead of being like fixed with only looking at it in 3 directions, I can freely look at it in any direction. So it's just like a free slicing capability in VR that I can implement and have that exact data. But if I was doing this planning, or if I was like making a millimeter movement of an implant, let's say during my surgical plan, in a regular CT scan machine, I would, or software, sorry, I would need to visualize it in all 3 slices repeatedly anytime I made a change. And it's just so much more intuitive to do that in VR. Another thing, and I know I've spoken about this quite extensively, is just pre-op rehearsal. So it's not just about putting the headset on before surgery, but this is the video you were seeing on my very initial slide. This is me planning implants. But what I can also do right now is I know this is going to be a very, very complex surgery. I can pick up tools, whatever tools that I would need to use, and have my engineers build it into it. So what you're seeing right now is I am holding a drill. Okay, I'm holding a drill in my hand because I'm supposed to drill into that bone. And I can rehearse it right now. And I can see that, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a little bit of interference if I'm going in that angle, I'm going to have interference from the other side. So my ability to do a surgery in VR before actually doing a surgery has made a tremendous difference. Really has, because there is no other way to do this. Um, Surgeons have for a long time 3D printed models and everything. We very frequently will print models of somebody's skull, like the bone structure essentially, to be able to rehearse the surgery before we actually do the surgery. But once again, you cannot merge skin with bone and all of that in a 3D printed model. It just doesn't come out very easily. So again, in VR, you can just like plan and rehearse your entire surgery. Sorry about this animation. And then other things that are very fascinating. So sometimes we'll place implants. You're seeing this patient missing. This is the only patient image. Yeah, the patient is missing an eye because of a tumor. We place some implants for him, and what you're seeing on the right is a prosthetic eye, essentially. But where this is also very fascinating is planning softwares don't exist for everything that we do under the sun, because we do so much that is sort of just outside the box, right? So there aren't tools truly available for being able to plan every different kind of surgery. Sometimes you base this on, like I said, freeform or mesh mixer sort of free softwares, and just, VR just gives you the ability to be able to plan anything that is just not standard and out of the box. And what you're seeing here is the patient himself putting on the VR glasses and experiencing what his surgery is going to be. Now, he's saying, is that my sphenoid bone? Not every patient knows what the sphenoid bone is. This is somebody who is within healthcare. But what we're also seeing, and this is very fascinating to me, is younger adults, younger teenagers is what I would say at the moment. We see a lot of teenagers who are going to go through very complex surgeries because they had some sort of difference, some abnormality of their skeletal structure, and they're going to go through these big surgeries. If you walked into my center, every day you'll see at least one teenager with a VR headset on, wanting to understand what is the surgery that they're going through. So that has become very, very interesting, and how patients are wanting to experience what is, their surgery essentially. I want to talk about a little bit of how we're integrating this, because I took away all surgical content. Like I mentioned to you, within our VR environment, we're able to put in a wide variety of data. So DICOM is the data that is CT scans and MRI scans and CT of your blood vessels and any sort of STL. So in one of the videos where I showed you what the patient's teeth will look like, that is essentially an STL format. So I can input these formats and be able to merge it together. And what I will get out of VR is, once again, STL or object files. And the way we're using this right now is we're doing our surgical planning in VR. For actually doing this surgery, we are still having to move a little bit towards our traditional ways of making guides, like surgical guides. And these guides are made out of either some sort of resin material, or they can be made out of metal, or just different splints. But what we're now experimenting, what would be a complete closed loop, would be to take our surgical plan from the VR environment and then take it to a different technology for actually doing the surgery, whether that be going from VR to robotics or going from VR to dynamic navigation or like surgical navigation or going from VR to AR. And I'll talk a little bit more about this. And the reason this is something that is so interesting for us is because right now for doing surgeries, when we want to do surgeries in a very predictable way, that's the reason we use surgical guides. But surgical guides are very cumbersome to use. And they also add a lot more time for manufacturing these guides, right? Especially if you want to use with metal guides, like most companies, turnaround times are about 3 weeks. That's a very long time. So if you assume somebody who had an accident, right, they will have their initial procedures, life-saving procedures, essentially just to stabilize them as soon as they get to the hospital in the ER. But any sort of reconstruction phase of their procedures is very drastically delayed. So patients, sometimes like it takes a year, 2 years, 3 years for them to be sort of done with their reconstructive phase. If we had the ability truly to be able to visualize and surgically plan immediately, which VR does provide us, and then be able to implement it by moving towards navigation or moving towards augmented reality, that would be very fascinating. And of course, we can still do that. I'm not saying we cannot, but you're not doing that with any sort of digital assistance. That's a very analog way of doing it based on experience and based on knowing how to put things back together in a patient who's had very severe trauma. But once again, I want to talk about augmented reality here. So
And,
at the moment,
Akanksha, can I interrupt
yeah,
for just 1 second? Because I know
yeah.
we want to be respectful of those that have to drop out at 1, but I do want to, I'm sure we may have some questions. So love to have this part is fascinating. But yeah, there are a few questions in the chat too that we can get to. Just giving you that heads up.
Okay, perfect. I'll finish in 1 minute. So AR essentially is what the way we're using this is we planned everything in VR. And what I want to take from that is my plan and superimpose it on the patient. So I know exactly, for instance, if I'm placing an implant, which is all I need to know is what is the vector of my implant? How do I need to place it? That is something I can use AR to digitally superimpose it on the patient, making it a much better and more predictable sort of a surgical output. So that's what you're looking at. This is me basically in the operating room on a patient, be able to superimpose certain vectors to know exactly where things need to go without the need for very cumbersome guides here. Okay. And I'll stop at that. I apologize, my mouse is not moving. Neither is my presentation. Okay, my presentation is frozen. I don't know, Caroline, if
I'm okay.
something
That's
happened
okay.
with the sharing. Okay.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yes.
There
There we go.
it's so much fascinating work, and I do want to get just for those of you who do need to get to something else, but for those who'd like to stay, Akanksha, there were a few questions that I wanted to address first in the chat, and let me go find those. I think one of them was from Sarah B, and it was a question about, are you working in pass-through with a physical model when you do this work, or are you working at this in full VR? And I think that was the latter, correct?
So at the moment, the planning phase is entirely in VR, and then we will go to physical models for the surgery itself. We'll print all the physical models just to have it at time of surgery for us to refer to at the moment. But if we were able to go from VR to AR, and the reason we're not working with AR for actual implementation is because AR hardware is just not there yet. Like the precision that we require off of AR, we don't get. There's latency and calibration issues with AR, which don't make it as precise as some of our physical guides itself. And that's why we're going from VR to physical models.
And then there's a second question, is haptic technology actually in use in surgery at this time?
Not in use of surgery, but it is in use for planning. We've been using haptic technology for, I want to say, close to 15 years at this point. During surgery, we have our actual instruments and tools which create that vibration effect. And that's what we're trying to recreate with haptic devices prior to surgery.
Amazing. Did anybody else have any questions? Feel free to unmute and go ahead and ask if you'd like to, and ask something to Dr. Srivastava.
Yep, thank you so much. I'm just reading the comments. I appreciate all of you. I did become very passionate, and I didn't mean to overextend in time. I was very
Oh,
sure
no,
would
no, no,
finish.
no. It's so fascinating. Yeah. Um, well, if nobody else has questions, I think Akanksha, I did want to ask, um, you do some speaking around the country.
I do.
There are obviously such a small community of people doing this work. Um, are there is there movement to in that expansion, and hopefully XR Women is the type of community that can help elevate that and bring more attention to this work. And yes, there's Immersive Touch. We had
Right.
Jay Banerjee from Immersive Touch, and actually, if anybody wants to see it, I'll put the link to last year's
Yeah.
VR Air Chicago, where we had um, Akanksha and Jay, who featured themselves in that presentation. But did you want to
Yeah.
answer that?
Yes, absolutely. So yes, there is a lot of excitement in the world out there, and I know, I mean, and globally. So Germany has a lot more that is available. Korea has a lot more that is available in terms of possibilities. So within the U.S., I want to just take a moment to talk about Immersive Touch. This is essentially a startup company that came from a core group of people within my university from plastic surgery and mechanical engineering. They got together and they started working on VR. And that's how Immersive Touch was born. The owner of that, Pat Banerjee, he's the person from mechanical engineering. They're the ones who developed everything that I am talking to you about. Now, these abilities don't truly exist in many different ways because surgical planning, which is very patient based, is not necessarily the best financial models for most big companies to look into, right? So that is why the amount of efforts that have been put into. So, for instance, when I was talking about virtual surgical planning, even a company like Johnson and Johnson has an arm to their company that is for virtual surgical planning because that is just a little bit easier. It doesn't have to be as specifically catering to a particular type of surgeon, so they can build those softwares a little bit easier and just it's bang for their buck when they're making those investments versus in VR you have to develop something that is very very specific to a particular group of surgeons. Immersive Touch has developed these applications for again a wide variety of surgeons, but that truly is this one small company, and nothing in the country right now parallels these abilities. So again, I am just very privileged to be in the same space as all of them and have the opportunity to use it. And so they're the ones who are at different meetings and they have different uptakes. So there are, I mean, they have their softwares all the way in India and Europe, as well as in several hospitals within the US. For a lot of smaller centers, this can be a bit cost prohibitive at the moment. And once again, talking about different investments or different startups or bigger companies who are looking into this, I've had an extensive chat with Lenovo. Obviously, they have to look at the most profitable model. So more people are, focused more on the education aspect of it or surgical training aspect of it, where they can just develop one model that will get utilized over and over again versus having to do the legwork per patient. So yes, as fascinating as it is, and there is good uptake. I'm not going to say there isn't as a good uptake. There are several factors that limit, people being able to adopt this. So again, closing the loop, if we got to that point, and if we got to whenever we got to the point where we went from VR to AR, everybody will adopt this because then you just entirely change your surgical workflow. Right now, we're just using VR to replace VSP, and we're still going back to the traditional ways of performing the surgery. So maybe a couple of more years as hardware develops, right? Like we're going to see some massive uptake. That's my thoughts.
Fabulous. Did anyone else have any more questions, comments?
I just have one. Thank you for, well, more of a comment. Just thank you so much for presenting today. It's Julie Smithson, and thanks everybody here at XR Women who joined us today. We really appreciate it. It was absolutely fascinating. Like my head is spinning, just all of the different efficiencies that you must have in your workflow, and
Right.
how you're able to even, care for the patients sooner, faster, quicker. And it's the power of this technology. So thank you so much for sharing your work and, inspiring how much this industry will change based on this technology. So if XR Women can help in any way in inspiring more people who are doing your great work, we're happy to be here for you. So thank you again. Appreciate
Thank you, Julie. So appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Caroline.
Oh, thank you for coming.
Great.
Terrific.
Well, why don't we could formally close off, Caroline, and
Sure.
anybody who wishes to stay, and of course, as long as you're available, Akanksha, to speak with anybody, it's totally up to you. We also have Kay Guillory's museum space here, and if anybody wants to take a walk through that before you leave, it's just on the door to the left up there. And it's 10 after 1 Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great week. And thank you, Dr. Akanksha.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Really, really fascinating. And